The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as people shuffled in and out, settling into their places. Judge Anthony Morgan, a man in his early 50s with an air of authority and fairness, adjusted his glasses and scanned the docket for the day. His routine was predictable, the cases blending together after years of presiding over them. But today was about to be anything but ordinary. The next case was brought forward, a guardianship hearing involving an 11-year-old girl named Maya Bennett. As Anthony read the file, his brow furrowed slightly. The girl had spent her entire life in the foster care system after losing her mother 2 years ago. Anthony prided himself on maintaining emotional distance in his courtroom. But something about this case tugged at him in an unfamiliar way. Maya entered the room, clutching a worn-out teddy bear in one hand and a small backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked around nervously, her wide brown eyes darting from one face to another until they settled on Anthony. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, fear, hope, and determination all rolled into one. Her foster advocate gently nudged her forward. "It's okay, Maya. You can do this," the woman whispered. Maya took a deep breath, her tiny frame trembling as she stepped up to the stand. She glanced down at her teddy bear for reassurance before looking up at the judge. Anthony noticed her hesitation and softened his tone. "Take your time, young lady," he said, his voice calm and steady. I have something to say," Maya began, her voice barely above a whisper. The courtroom went silent, every eye on her. Anthony leaned forward slightly, his curiosity piqued. "You may speak," he encouraged. Maya swallowed hard, gripping the bear tighter. "Your Honor, before this hearing goes any further, I need to tell you something important." Anthony raised an eyebrow, his gaze fixed on her. "Go on," he said, his tone measured but curious. Maya's next words sent a shockwave through the room. "You're my dad," she blurted out, her voice trembling but steady. The murmurs in the courtroom ceased instantly, replaced by a heavy, stunned silence. Anthony blinked, his composure momentarily shattered. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" he asked, his usually steady voice wavering slightly. "You're my dad," Maya repeated, her words firmer now. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded letter. "My mom wrote this before she died," she said. "You're my father." The weight of her statement hung in the air, palpable and undeniable. Anthony sat frozen, the letter in her small hands drawing his attention like a magnet. For the first time in years, he found himself at a loss for words. "I have proof," Maya added, her tone tinged with desperation. "Please, Your Honor, just read the letter." Anthony motioned for the bailiff to retrieve the letter, his heart pounding in his chest as he unfolded it with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the words, and the courtroom seemed to fade away. The handwriting was unmistakably that of Evelyn Parker, a woman he had loved deeply many years ago. The letter detailed a secret she had kept for over a decade, a child she had chosen to raise alone, fearing the impact it might have on his career. Anthony's world tilted on its axis. He struggled to reconcile the child standing before him with the life he thought he knew. Who was this brave, trembling girl who had just upended his existence with a few simple words? "Recess," Anthony announced abruptly, his voice cracking. He stood, his gavel forgotten, and quickly exited the courtroom, leaving behind a stunned silence and a little girl clutching her teddy bear, her gaze never leaving him. Anthony sat alone in his chambers, the weight of the letter in his hands making it feel heavier than paper should. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the courtroom beyond the door. His chest felt tight, his thoughts tangled and frantic as he unfolded the letter again. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, flowing script he hadn't seen in over a decade. It belonged to Evelyn Parker, a woman he once cared for deeply. Memories of her flooded back, her warm laughter, her sharp wit, and the way she always made him feel like he could conquer the world. But those memories were tinged with a bittersweet ache now as her words stared back at him from the page. Anthony's hands shook as he set the letter down on his desk, a wave of emotions crashing over him: shock, guilt, sadness, and something else he couldn't quite name. How had he not known? Why hadn't Evelyn told him? And this girl, Maya, his daughter? The words echoed in his mind, refusing to settle. His daughter. He pressed his palms against his face, trying to steady his breathing. He had spent years building a reputation as a fair and composed judge, but this moment felt like it was tearing him apart. The realization that he had unknowingly missed over a decade of his child's life was a pain he couldn't describe. A soft knock on the door broke his spiraling thoughts. "Come in," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. It was his clerk, a kind older woman named Mrs. Turner. "Your Honor, are you all right?" she asked gently. He nodded, though the gesture felt hollow. "I need a moment. Mrs. Turner, please reschedule the afternoon cases and," he hesitated, "ask the bailiff to bring Maya and her advocate to my chambers." Mrs. Turner gave a small nod and left quietly, leaving Anthony to gather himself. He took a deep breath, folded the letter carefully, and placed it back into its envelope. Whatever questions he had, there was only one person who could provide the answers now. A few minutes later, there was another knock, and the door opened. Maya stepped in hesitantly, clutching her teddy bear, her foster advocate following closely behind. Anthony rose from his chair, his towering presence softened by the vulnerability in his eyes. "Please, come in," he said gently, motioning for them to sit on the couch opposite his desk. Maya perched on the edge of the seat, her small hands gripping the bear tightly. Anthony sat down across from her, folding his hands in his lap. For a moment, he didn't speak, simply observing the young girl in front of him. She had Evelyn's eyes, dark and expressive, and her quiet determination. "Maya," he began softly, his voice almost breaking, "I read your mother's letter." Her eyes widened slightly, and she nodded. "She told me about you," she said. "She said you didn't know, but that you were a good man." Anthony swallowed hard. "Your mother was an incredible woman. I didn't know about you. And if I had," he stopped, his words catching in his throat, "I would have wanted to be there for you." Maya's lips trembled, and for the first time, tears filled her eyes. Do you believe me?" she whispered. Anthony leaned forward, his voice firm but kind. "Yes, Maya, I believe you. I have no doubt." A small sob escaped her, and she wiped her eyes quickly, as if embarrassed. I thought you might not want me." The words cut through Anthony like a knife. He reached out, hesitating for only a second before placing his hand gently on hers. "I want you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I don't know how to make up for the years we lost, but I want to know you, if you'll let me. I'd like to be the father you deserve." Maya stared at him, her tears falling freely now. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. She nodded slowly, her grip on the teddy bear loosening as she allowed herself to trust. As the conversation continued, Anthony asked about her life, her favorite books, what she liked to do for fun, and her memories of her mother. Maya spoke quietly at first, but as the minutes passed, she began to open up. For Anthony, every word was a revelation, every detail a glimpse into the life he hadn't known existed. He knew there was a long road ahead filled with challenges and questions, but one thing was clear: he wouldn't let her go again. "Maya," he said as they wrapped up their conversation, "I'd like to meet with you again soon. We have a lot to figure out, but I'm here for you. Always." For the first time, Maya smiled, a small, tentative smile that lit up her face. "Okay," she said softly, and in that moment, Anthony knew that everything had changed.